Hi, it's Mayor Sendzik, and welcome back to Our Home with Mayor Sendzik. Today we have a special guest who's not been on the show before, but who has done a tremendous amount for our community. And I'm joined by our St. Catharines MP Chris Bittle. Chris is a first-time MP elected in 2015. Yep. And prior to that, Chris was a lawyer in our community, still is a lawyer, but no longer practicing as a lawyer as he is an MP, but he's a graduate of Queen's University, got his law degree from Windsor, calls St. Catharines home, and it is actually an honor to have you on the show.
Well, thank you.
And it's an honor because you've been doing a lot of great work up in Ottawa, but a lot of folks at home may not know what you're doing up in Ottawa on a continuous basis. But one of the biggest news stories to hit over the past month has been the funding for the piers.
And this was an exciting day on Budget Day a couple of weeks ago when I got to crack open the budget for the first time and scroll through, and there was St. Catharines mentioned. And it didn't happen overnight, as you're well aware. It even goes back to the election campaign. And so for 2015, knocking on doors with my team, and it was an issue across St. Catharines. I remember knocking on doors in Meryton and hearing about the Port Dalhousie Piers because it's part of what we view our community as. We're drawn to water. It's an excellent opportunity to go out and relax, especially at sunset, and it's something people have missed over the past few years. Those fences you and I have discussed about how much we hate them and what a barrier it is for improving the community, and it's just that it's a sore point, especially when we were inviting the world with the Pan Am Games, and even just day by day, it's something we want to see improved in our community. So from day one, we hit the ground running up in Ottawa, made sure to meet with the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans as quickly as we could. Early on, we got an acknowledgement in the House of Commons. I was able to ask a question early on during question period, and the government acknowledged the importance of the piers to St. Catharines. But from that point forward, it was about meeting with Fisheries and Oceans, meeting with the Prime Minister's office, meetings with the Finance Department to ensure that it gets in the budget. It was about building alliances. I know this was a priority for the Atlantic Canadian Caucus, and they pushed hard as well. It was also a priority. The Finance Committee, which is the Standing Committee on Finance, they make recommendations every year for the budget. And Small Craft Harbors, which is the agency that operates the piers, there was a recommendation for a large increase in funding, and that attention be paid to divestiture. So we had a lot of allies. I appreciate all the work that you put in and the support of City Council as well. It makes the job as a Member of Parliament a lot easier when the Mayor and Council are behind you, and you're able to take the concerns of the city up to Ottawa. And so we had a couple of meetings with the Prime Minister. We had meetings with the Minister and their staff. And so it was a lot of work over 2 years, and to see it in print in the budget shows what a priority it is for the government. Usually smaller projects, and for us it's a big project, but in the scheme of the federal government it's not an enormous project, but usually they're not specifically mentioned in the budget, but the fact that it's mentioned in the budget shows the priority, shows the importance, and shows that we're well on our way, because this was the biggest hurdle, getting the funds. And so they're there. There's some work that has to be done, but we have a willing partner in the city and the federal government, and looking forward to seeing the next step.
So for the person who read about it, saw that it's in the budget, the line, I believe, says rehabilitation of east and west side of Port Dalhousie Piers, and we don't know exactly how much has been set aside, but there has an envelope that has been presented in the budget for Department of Ocean and Fisheries. So what are the next steps? What can people expect over the next 3 months, 6 months? What are you thinking on this sort of pathway forward?
Absolutely, and even after the budget, you and I hit the ground running. We made sure first day I was back in St. Catharines, I met with members of City Council to talk about the next step, because we do have to negotiate. The city does have to negotiate with the government, and that's what we'll see. The important thing to know is that the funding envelope is very large, $250 million, and there is a commitment to rehabilitate it. There were only 4 projects mentioned within that envelope. There will be other projects as well, but this is a priority. It's going to get done. There's going to be negotiations taking place over the course of the coming months. The one thing that people should know is that even though the budget has been announced, it probably won't be passed until the end of June, which is typically how it works. And so money can't start to flow till that day. And so I expect negotiations to take place now and even perhaps after that time. But again, the biggest hurdle was getting that funding announced and getting that in the budget, and that's there. We'll work out the details, the city and the federal government, but again, we're willing partners, and it's something that everyone wants to see get done.
And so do you think, I know we've talked about sort of the timeline, do you think the piers, one of the sides, the construction, do you think the piers will be rehabilitated by this time next year, or is this a longer term project that people have to understand that there's some timelines we have to hit?
I think we have to manage expectations going forward in terms of if the money's not going to become available until the end of June, even if there is a deal in place at the end of June, a request for proposals have to go out, companies have to bid, and you've probably lost this construction season entirely. We're building on water, so it's not something that can necessarily be done during winter. I'm not sure on the construction projects, and we will consult with the engineers, but weather will be more of an impact. If we get weather like we did last summer, in which there was flooding, that will be an issue. And so working on water is going to be a much different process, so it won't be something that's happening, unfortunately, by next summer, but it's something that will happen in the near future, and I'd like to see, I would usually say shovels in the ground, but work on the piers done as quickly as we can get to it.
So we'll come back to the piers later on the show in terms of even just Lakeside Park, but this was an interesting, was it unique? And I say this because first time MP coming into the position, is projects like this being requested across the country from every MP, or was this your expectation going, okay, this is $30 million. This is a lot of money for a project in our community. What was it like for you to go through that process as a first-time MP?
Well, it was an interesting process because as a rookie politician, sometimes it seems like you're drinking from the fire hose, and there's a lot of information coming at you. The federal government is an enormous institution with many bureaucracies operating as one, and trying to figure out how to access funds, how to lobby, is something that you have to get up to speed on very quickly. But it's important to make relationships, and it was the same in the practice of law and the same as any business. It's about person-to-person contacts and making those connections within various departments, within the Prime Minister's office, and demonstrating the importance. And so it was difficult at first to understand my role and where I was going, but once I got a sense of that, there was a benefit of being elected with 150 other rookies, right, that we were all learning together. But it was an excellent opportunity to learn, but then to push this issue forward. Because as you mentioned, there are other MPs out with their projects. There are 338 MPs, and each of the ridings has something that's important to them. And this was at the top of the list for me. And so it was an interesting process and an interesting way to learn about how to do my job, right, as best I could. And so it was an excellent learning process, and looking forward to moving on to the next items on our checklist. Well,
it was interesting in terms of giving you the opportunity to see how to navigate a request to completion. A lot of folks, I don't think, thought that this funding would come through for the piers. It wasn't necessarily a priority for the Department of Ocean and Fisheries in terms of it's not an ongoing commercial fishery. It's not a wharf, as you've called it before, from your Minister of Department of Ocean and Fisheries, Minister LeBlanc. Yep. It's a pier, but it's more of a recreational pier, but it's important to the community. So I just want to thank you for the effort put into getting to where we got today. But I want to go back to becoming an MP for the first time and what it was like. What adjustments have you had to make to this new career, moving away from being a lawyer to moving into being an elected official?
The biggest adjustment, and it's for any politician, is the difference in time commitment. So even the first thing is I used to walk to work. I live downtown. I walk to work at Lancaster, Brooks and Welch, and that was my morning routine. I now, during a sitting week, I fly to work, and that in and of itself is difficult with a family. I have a little guy, a year and a half, and so it's a lot of time away from family. And when I'm in the riding, and you're aware of this as well, and all politicians become aware of it, and it's what we've signed up for. But evenings get filled up, weekends get filled up, and that's the biggest adjustment. It's fun, I love it, and people ask me, well, how do you do it? How do you make that kind of time commitment? And I say, well, if you love your job, you never work a day in your life. And so I'm in that, but that has been the biggest challenge, the biggest difference between being a lawyer and sleeping in my bed every night, and then heading up to Ottawa. I think we're up about 22 weeks a year, and so it becomes a challenge. It becomes difficult at home, but it also is an excellent opportunity and something I've always wanted to do, and provides me with an excellent opportunity to create change for the better in my community.
So you were a lawyer, and then you moved into the political arena in Ottawa. What skills have you found to be most beneficial from being a lawyer to transitioning into an elected official in Ottawa?
Well, it was interesting. I sat down with a veteran member of our caucus, and she asked me what I did, and I said, well, lawyer. And she said, well, it's probably not going to help you here. And she didn't say it in a mean way, but I thought, well, that's weird. And it was early on, and I thought, well, maybe it won't help me. But I was a litigator, so being able to stand on your feet, make a point, make an argument. I sit on committees, so examining a witness, trying to get evidence forward, dealing with correspondence on a daily basis, managing a team. There were a lot of skills that translate quite easily over, and people make fun of us. There's a lot of lawyers in the federal parliament, but it's even dealing with laws. Like we can speak the language of lawyers, and sometimes lawyers will try to talk over people's heads, and we've never been guilty of that, but we're able to address that. We're able to read the fine print better than some others. Some lawyers, it can be a challenge for some lawyers because they interact well with other lawyers. They don't necessarily interact well with people. And as a lawyer, when I was practicing, I took pride in trying to make sure my clients understood what was going on and try to take the legal jargon and make it straightforward for the client so they understood what was going on. Right. And so that transitions well into government as well, because that I'm not talking to other MPs, I'm not trying to convince other politicians, I'm trying to convince, and ultimately our goal is to get reelected, and so it's about convincing voters and speaking to them.
And so in terms of a day in the life of an MP, just to give viewers a glimpse into what it's like being in Ottawa, because we see you around St. Catharines, you're at different events, you're at the market, you're in the community, but when you're in Ottawa, just a day in the life of.
Sure. So with my appointment as a Deputy Government House Leader back in September, every morning starts with a tactics meeting with the House Leadership team, the Whip's office and the Prime Minister's office, is what we think is going to happen in a day and how we're going to react to it, be it question period or issues in committees. Starts with that. I do sit on a committee, the excitingly titled Procedure and House Affairs Committee. Mm-hmm. And so that's 2 days a week in which I sit and we hear evidence, usually about issues within Parliament. We've been engaged in a study recently, which is interesting in terms of leaders' debates, and we'll have a report on that very soon. Every Wednesday is caucus, which all MPs get together, and we have an opportunity to express concerns and talk about issues. Politics is a team sport, though, so we all come out of it as one. As Deputy House Leader, there's an expectation that I'm in the House a bit more, and so my opportunity to speak in the House has risen quite dramatically over the past 6 months. And so as busy as I am in St. Catharines, I'm far busier in Ottawa. And it's interesting because constituents don't really know a lot of times what in fact I'm doing up in Ottawa.
And that's why I think it's important to share that day in the life of, or a week in the life of an MP, because we sometimes miss the fact that there's a lot of work being done away from the city, and then you still have a lot of interactions that take place in the city. So after the break, we're going to talk about other projects that you've been working on, local projects that have materialized in the community, and some of your special interests that you have in Ottawa that you're looking to make a difference on a more national level. So come back after the break. We're talking with St. Catharines MP Chris Bittle. Hi, and welcome back to Our Home with Mayor Sendzik. Today we are joined by St. Catharines MP Chris Bittle, who's been talking about the funding for the piers, which was amazing for our community, but as well as the behind-the-scenes look at Ottawa and what it's like to be a MP working in Ottawa and really bringing our issues in St. Catharines to Ottawa, but at the same time bringing the national news back, or the national issues back into a St. Catharines context. And this side of the segment, we're going to talk about some of the other initiatives that Chris has been working on in our community. One that I know Chris has been following very closely and has been an active participant in is some of the housing issues that we're facing. The affordability of homes in St. Catharines has changed dramatically over the last number of years. The availability of space for those who are looking to call St. Catharines home has become even more of a challenge. We face challenges when it comes to what would be social housing in our community. And as part of that, and I do think it's not just a St. Catharines issue, it is a national issue. And I think one of the most important pieces of legislation that came out of the Canadian government over the past 2 years, if not longer, has been a National Housing Action Plan. So Chris, tell us a bit about that and what it means to St. Catharines.
Absolutely. And I'll even rewind back a little bit for me and the importance to me. Even though I was a lawyer, my favorite job in St. Catharines was, and the one they didn't pay me for, was chair of Quest Community Health Centre. Right. And the thing that we looked at, even though it was a health clinic, we looked at the social determinants of health. And that's just a fancy word of what else is impacting individuals' health. And a lot of times that's poverty, it's housing, it's dental. There's so many issues, that education levels, and so much that go into that one little thing. And when we talk about health or poverty or education or all of these things, at the center of it always is housing. And if we want to talk about real, significant, lasting change in our community and in our country, housing's at the center of that. And we will see impacts. We're the first government, and it took 2 years and a lot of study, met with a lot of experts. We're the first government to come out with a action plan, the National Housing Strategy. Yeah. And the last budget 2017, we committed approximately $40 billion over the next 10 years to fight this. And I know in Ontario and locally, we have some amazing partners in the government of Ontario and at the city of St. Catharines and at the region that want to see this happen, because we're seeing the impacts of it. And if we're talking about things like, and it's hard to believe and it seems counterintuitive to people, but if we talk about the opioid crisis, or we talk about poverty or homelessness, or all these other issues, affordable housing has to be at the center of that. Right. Because if we're finding a home for someone, it's a lot cheaper, and this is the counterintuitive part, it's a lot cheaper to find a home for someone than to deal with all of the issues or symptoms of the lack of affordable housing that come afterwards. Right. And whether that's the criminal justice system or education or healthcare, so much can be aided in our community. And so our goal is ambitious in that over the next 10 years, we want to see a drop of homelessness of approximately 50%. Right. But we have the money committed. We have great partners across the country who want to help us, and we have a plan. And so right now we've committed the money. We're waiting for agreements with the provinces so that we can, because it is an area of provincial responsibility, we can't just start spending money on it. We want to work collaboratively with our provincial partners. And so my hope is that very soon we will see money being invested. We had the opportunity, I know we were both there, to break ground in one of the first affordable housing sites in St. Catharines in decades.
Yeah, since 1977.
And so it's shocking that in my lifetime we hadn't built any affordable housing in St. Catharines, and the impacts of that are showing.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of money available. I was happy to bring down Adam Vaughan, and we met at City Hall with a lot of stakeholders in St. Catharines and across Niagara to show him that homelessness isn't just a Toronto issue. It's not a GTA issue, that it impacts places like St. Catharines differently, and including a lot of individuals who are migrating from Toronto because even though prices are rising in St. Catharines, there's still more bang for your buck in St. Catharines. And so it is an issue that I'm passionate about. It is an issue that I am focused on and something that we have to move on. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the money flow and us getting some shovels in the ground.
And it was interesting. Adam Vaughan is a MP out of Toronto who was one of the architects of the Housing Action Plan, the affordable housing strategy for the country. And when we were in Ottawa, we had an opportunity to meet with him and talk about some of the projects that we have. And we have the other Bethlehem housing project on Church Street that has been approved as well. So we have two affordable housing developments going up in our community, and you've been involved in both of them in terms of as a participant, as someone who's been an advocate for it. And I think it's important. We're going to be following this along closely. And it's a bold plan that the federal government has come up with, and it's one that I think will have a positive impact on communities across the country. Another one that you had been instrumental in is providing funding for public transit here in Niagara. And I think it was the single largest investment in public transit that the federal government has made to date.
Absolutely.
And why did you think that was, I know why it was important, but why did you think it was important to be an advocate for that amount of funding?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first one, and the one that we talk about, is that it's green. If we're getting people on buses, off out of cars, onto public transit, we are addressing global climate change, which is a reality. We only have to look to within Niagara over the last couple of years. Last year we had flooding, but the year before was drought, and so we have to do better. Across all levels of government. One of the easiest things to do is public transit. And so we were fortunate enough, we campaigned as the Liberal Party, we campaigned for strong public transit infrastructure funding, and we're delivering on that commitment. The other item, and which I see in Niagara, is it's a poverty piece. When there's jobs that are going unapplied for in Niagara Falls, for example, because people can't access those jobs because they live in well under St. Catharines or Thorold or wherever the case is, that's a problem. And so if we can get the labor market moving within Niagara, we can make it easier for employers, we can make it easier for development and improving our economy, because it doesn't matter if you need a job but you can't get there, it doesn't matter. And it goes back to the previous segment about affordable housing.
Right.
It's not so easy to just pick up and move to another city.
Right.
And so there's all of these issues, and I'm looking forward, and I've been excited to watch and happy with the progress between St. Catharines, Welland, and Niagara Falls, and where we're moving on intermunicipal transit, because that's the way we have to get forward. We have to be able to move people across the peninsula, because business doesn't work within silos of municipal boundaries.
Right.
They're dealing with business across the country, across the world, and they need to be able to get their workers across the peninsula. So it's something I remember meeting with president of Niagara College Students Union and telling me that he had to negotiate with, I believe it was 8 different transit authorities, and that seemed ridiculous and even a challenge to recruit students for Niagara College or Brock University. And so I'm excited as we move forward on public transit.
Now, in terms of, that was about a $14 million investment. So, just to put it in context, $30 million for the piers, $14 million for the transit, and that allows for that integration to start taking place, affordable housing in our community, further investments to be made there. It shows that the government is committed to investing in communities. And where do you think now, when we're looking at transit, when we're looking at housing, where are some of the other areas that you think the federal government can be a partner?
Absolutely, and something we talked about from the election campaign was the infrastructure deficit, and I was at City Council a couple of weeks ago and the topic was brought up, and that's where we're coming from on this investment. People thought we were dead in the water when we said we were going to run deficits to fix this infrastructure deficit across the country. But we said interest rates are low, now's the time to invest, and not invest in necessarily sexy projects that politicians can cut ribbons in front of. We're going to invest in public transit. We're going to invest in water and wastewater. And that was a big announcement that we had last year as well in terms of, I believe it was about $15 million for the Niagara region in water and wastewater. It's something that we take for granted, but we expect that when we go to the tap, there's clean water there, or that the drains flow, and that's something that Canadians expect. And so that's something we have to assist municipalities on, because if the federal government's not going to go there, all that's going to happen is water rates are going to go up.
Right.
And so we're helping fix that infrastructure backlog, and that's something that we want to continue to be a partner with our municipal partners on. And it's something that has worked well, and we're going to continue to do that.
All right, so I want to sort of pivot away for, we only got about a minute left, and a fun fact about MP Chris Bittle, and you have some kind of device on your desk in Ottawa. It's some kind of sword of some sort, or some kind of saber.
It's a lightsaber. It's I'm a bit of a Star Wars fan, so that's on the front of my desk. It's a good conversation piece. There's a lot of Star Wars fans, but it's
Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader.
Definitely Luke Skywalker.
Luke Skywalker.
Luke Skywalker.
Favorite Star Wars character?
Favorite Star Wars character?
Jar Jar Binks?
Yeah, even mentioning that name. Favorite one is Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
All right. The old Obi-Wan or the new?
Old Obi-Wan.
Old one. He's the one who holds title with you.
Absolutely.
That's wonderful. So I want to thank you for being on the show. You've provided great insight into what it's like to be an MP, and more importantly, you've talked about the investments that the federal government is making into our community. And when you look at whether it's the Piers or Lakeside Park, we didn't even touch on that, with Lakeside Park and the investments into the pavilion, into the band shell, bringing Lakeside Park back to life, and Centennial Park in downtown St. Catharines has received federal funding. Rotary Park in West St. Catharines, splash pads have received funding from the federal government. There's just a lot of investments that are taking place, and on behalf of the people of St. Catharines, I want to thank you for your tireless effort in Ottawa. I know it's a challenge, it's not easy every day, but you do it, and you take our voice to Ottawa, and you really bring back a lot of opportunities for our community. So we look forward to having you on the show in the future with some further updates.
Excellent.
For those following along at home, I want you to have a wonderful March. Heading into April, I hope you had a safe March break, and I want to see you out and about, whether it's at Market Square or at Lakeside Park or just on our trails and on our sidewalks, just enjoying yourselves. So until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day and take care of yourself.